There, good morning. Whoop, I'm sorry, I'm running people over here. They say a collision at sea can ruin your whole day. Uh, so, good morning. So we're sort of in the home stretch of looking at the scientific aspects of our discussion of the flood. That's this week. Next week, then Denise and I are away for vacation for a couple of weeks. So we'll be back on the 5th of July, I guess it is. On that day, we'll be looking at why we had to have the flood in the first place, why we had to have the flood, why God had to bring about the flood in the first place. We'll be on that 5th. Then I'm away on the 12th at summer camp with the scout troop. But when I get back from that, then we get into we're gonna get real deep in July and into August, talking about those verses in Genesis 6. So that's sort of an overview of where we're going here. So we had done our little side thing talking about the firmament last week. So to sort of go back 2 weeks, whoops, that was not the slide I was on. Or it was. That's the slide I was on. That's better. Okay, so where we were at, we were talking about this whole idea of plate tectonics and the fit to the continents, the way that they fit together with the mid-ocean ridge, and we had talked about that a little bit. That what that is, I mean, the secular geologists say that that's for your seafloor spreading and this long-term process, but in our interesting in some of the things I've been looking at, we've got what is called uniformitarian plate tectonics. That's the long amount of time, the long gradual process plate tectonics versus our discussion of plate tectonics, which is catastrophic plate tectonics. Still a lot of the same stuff. It's the continents moving and the all that stuff, but the driving force is a totally different thing. And that driving force is that mid-ocean ridge. That's the crack. That's the place where the fountains of the deep were opened up. And we're going to sort of look at that aspect of it this week, and then some of the other aspects that look at where's the evidence that this happened. All right. And the crazy thing is that evidence is all around us. It's everywhere. Secular geologists are missing the forest for the trees. They say, oh, well, there's no evidence for the flood. It's literally everywhere we look. So here's our mid-ocean ridge that we had talked about, that crack that's going all the way around. You get the really bad mindset of this because we're looking at this flat projection of the earth. The better way to think about it and to sort of visualize it, think about that seam on a baseball. If you follow the seam of a baseball all the way around, you eventually get all the way around to the place where you started. Even though it looks like it's two lines, the same thing here. It looks like it's two different ridge lines, but this connects up here where we can't see it, up into the Arctic, and then wraps around, and it does connect all the way around. One of the things that they have a lot of trouble explaining is this particular section of the mid-ocean ridge. And what's so interesting is so many different aspects of what we're going to be looking at this week and next week. There are aspects where you've got a relatively reasonable explanation of plate tectonics, and we've got the flood explanation. And so many of the things in the secular plate tectonics, they don't have a good explanation for, so they sort of ignore it. Whereas in our explanation, there's explanations for why. It answers those questions. And it does make it a much stronger theory that we're talking about here. Here's our question. This is in the Indian Ocean. Here's Africa, Madagascar, and we've got the mid-ocean ridge coming from the Atlantic wrapping around the Horn of Africa, up into the Indian Ocean, and it all of a sudden stops. Why? Some questions that plate tectonics can't explain. That particular seam there. If this is plate tectonics, if there is molten rock pushing up from underneath and pushing the plates outwards, how can we have outward motion here, and outward motion here, and outward motion here and here? It can't explain this motion that literally is going in 4 different directions from this same process of magma rising up from the mantle and then spreading out, this convection process. It can't explain that. It also can't explain convergence is where things come together. Well, if this is moving this way and this is moving this way, we should have some evidence of convergence, of things running into each other in this area of the Indian Ocean. And we don't. The same thing here. It's not as dramatic up here, but in this particular section, there's no convergence. There's no mountain ridges. There's no trenches. There's nothing showing here that this plate is moving this way, colliding with this plate that's coming this way. There should be stuff going on here. And then the other part is this western piece that comes around like this, and all of a sudden it just stops. Why doesn't it keep going through? What's going on there? Well, here's our mid-ocean ridge and the crack going all the way around, and literally this is the crack. This is the breaking open of the fountains of the deep that we're going to look at in more detail today. Starting up here in the Arctic Ocean, and the crack expanding in both directions from that start point at about 5 miles, between 3 and 5 miles per second. So the biblical verse of, on that same day, all of the fountains of the deep burst open. This took maybe 5, 6, 7 hours to happen, but it happened all in one day. And this crack starts racing around the planet, going this direction, going this direction. And when you plot it out from this starting point, when you plot it out, this crack is going in this direction and then coming this way, this crack going up into the Arctic, down through the Atlantic, and this distance is just a little bit longer than this distance. So this crack goes past, and then this crack comes up to it, hits that crack, and just stops. Very simple explanation for why this ridge line just stops. It hits that pre-existing crack, that place where the fountains had already opened up. Plate tectonics can't explain that. So it started in the Arctic Ocean. It went along what's now the mid-ocean ridge. Tremendous, tremendous pressure. That water is 60 miles down, so you've got a 60-mile layer of granite rock pressing downward on this roughly mile-thick layer of water. Immense, immense pressures pushing downward on this. When that crack opens up, when God supernaturally cracks that crust, because that can't happen naturally. We looked at already how a crack starting from the surface will propagate down. It'll move its way downward, but it'll stop at about 5 miles depth because of the pressure of the rock. And what's so interesting is, as I was going through this, all of this, every single bit of it, can be explained with one, bless you, one physical force, and that's gravity. All of this, everything that we look at in what happens during the flood, all of the post-flood structures that we see are all driven by gravity. We don't have to have hot spots, and we don't have to have convection, and it's got to be in certain spots, but not on other spots, or things like that. If you get God to supernaturally crack that plate up in the Arctic Ocean, everything else just runs on its own. It all just happens. In Genesis 7:11, it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, in the 17th day of the month, all of the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. The word broken up there is the Hebrew word baka, similar to raka that we looked at last week. The word baka translates to burst forth, broken up, burst open, divide. It can be used in any of those different ways. And that's exactly what happened. The plates are dividing apart. It's broken open, it's broken up and broken so that water can just powerfully burst forth. This is what's going on. What I said about the forces and everything is happening just with gravity. We've got our plate here. This is our 60-mile thick layer of granite. Here's our fountains of the deep. All right. So what's pushing down? What's pushing downward on that crust? Gravity. All right. Gravity is pulling downward on that crust. Well, my buddy Newton, in his third law of motion, says for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So gravity is pushing downward. The mantle is pushing upward. And those two forces are exactly equal. They're balanced. Okay, if they weren't balanced, things start moving. All right. Right now, my force upward on my pointer is equally balancing the pull of gravity downward. If my upward pull on the pointer stops, there's an imbalance of forces and things happen. Same thing here. As long as that crust is solid, we're good. God puts that crack there. He causes the fountains of the deep to burst open. He produces this crack. Now all of a sudden, there's a spot here, right here at the crack, where there is no downward acting force. There's only upward acting force. And that upward acting force is going to cause that water to come blasting out of there. Supersonic speeds. We're looking, that water coming shooting out of there at 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 miles per hour. It comes blasting outward and into the upper atmosphere. If we really wanted to go further, and if you get that guy's book, this not only explains, and we're not going to go to that, this doesn't just explain the structures that are here on the Earth, but it also explains structures that are out in our solar system. All right, the asteroid belt. All those rocks that sit between Mars and Jupiter in orbit. When you look at the asteroids in the asteroid belt, if you were to collect up all of those rocks, their explanation is, oh, that's a planet that never formed. Those rocks didn't come together, and they didn't form a planet. No mechanism for why it didn't form. Their other explanation is, oh, that was a planet that got broken up because of an impact. But if you add up all the asteroids, it makes a really tiny planet, like smaller than the moon. It's not really big enough to be the remnants of a planet that broke up. What is it? It's the water vapor and rocks that were blasted out of the fountains of the deep. This supersonic speeds here, from that water coming out, you are looking, normal atmospheric pressure is 15 pounds per square inch. Every 30 feet of water adds another 15 pounds per square inch. So if you were 15 feet down below the surface of the water, you've got 15 pounds per square inch because of the atmosphere and 15 pounds per square inch because of the water, 30 pounds per square inch. You are talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds per square inch acting on that water. That water's blasting out. It literally blasts out at speeds fast enough to escape the Earth's gravitational pull. And it's that material, it's material from the fountains of the deep that form the asteroids, that form comets. I mean, all of this kind of stuff is coming from this. What we fail to grasp, and again, I keep harping back to it, but it's reality. Every time we talk about the flood, and I keep knocking that cute little song, all right? Getting on the arky thing. But the story we tell little kids, if you say the flood, what's the first phrase that comes to mind? 40 days and nights of rain. And that's the tiny piece. That's not the big piece. The big piece is these fountains of the great deep. That's what drives everything, not the rain. The rain's not that big a deal in the big picture. That water, it comes blasting out into the atmosphere, and that water is what condenses as the torrential rain. Oh, how can we have rain that's that hard? Because we've got water that's that much. It's that huge amount of water that gets up into the atmosphere and condenses. The word is geshem, the word that is used for rain in Genesis 7:12. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And then also in 8:2. That word rain there is geshem. That's torrential rain. Rain that's raining so hard I wouldn't be able to see my stand from where I'm standing here. It's torrential rain that we don't normally experience, as opposed to the other times that it uses the word rain, other than in 7:12 and 8:2, the word for rain is matar, which is just rain. It's what we usually experience as rain. All right. The rain in verse 7:12, the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. That's geshem. That's caused by this. All right. And what's interesting is, look at the order. Look at the sequence in Genesis 7:11. In the 600th day of Noah's life, in the second month, in the 17th day of the month, the same day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. What happened first? The fountains of the great deep first, then the windows of heaven. All right? The fountains of the deep precede and cause the rain from the windows of heaven. It's a cause and effect thing. The fountains of the great deep is what causes the rain. And again, here's the fountains of the great deep burst open. The word there is baka. And then the floodgates of the sky. Again, those different translation words. The windows of the sky, the floodgates of the sky. All right? So the crack happens first, then the rain happens. And again, it makes sense. Because now, let's look later. Think about our timing. What happens? The fountains of the great deep crack open. It rains for 40 days and 40 nights. Oh, it's that entire line. It was the fountains of the great deep are literally that entire line. It's this reservoir of water, sort of like how we can't build in the Pinelands because there's a big aquifer, there's water underground. That underground water is a few thousand feet down. This is water that was 60 miles down the entire planet, surrounding the entire planet. But now you crack that open, and everywhere along that line, that water is coming shooting out. Everywhere along that line. Back to here. Okay, let's think about our sequence here. What happens? It rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and then the waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth. The ark went upon the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed. Dropping down here, chapter 7, verse 24, and the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. 40 days of geshem rain, but 150 days where the waters keep rising. Again, this explains what's going on here. So the crack opens up, the water comes blasting out into the atmosphere and outward onto the surface of the earth, and then it starts to rain. So we get our 40 days of geshem rain. But then the pressure starts to decrease We no longer get these massive jets coming upward, but the water is still being forced out. The water is still being forced out. The analogy that they used in the one video I was watching was, imagine you have a swimming pool and you put a sprinkler in the bottom of the swimming pool and you turn the sprinkler on. What happens? The water's coming out of the sprinkler, like our fountains of the deep. But as the water continues to come out and the pool begins to fill up, the sprinkler gets covered. The sprinkler is still putting water out, but it's no longer jetting upwards. But it's still coming out and making the water level in the pool rise. It's exactly what's going on here. As this spreads out, as that opening spreads out, and that opening was 10, 15, 20 miles wide of water coming from the great deep, being forced outwards. But now, because there's a layer of water on the surface, we're no longer, and the pressures are starting to drop as we're losing water from in here, it's no longer shooting outwards, but it's still coming out. And the waters are continuing to rise. The waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days. So then when God stops up the fountains of the deep, the waters stop rising. The water's still there, but it stops rising. This idea of this crack along here also explains something that are called continental shelves. If you go out, if you go down to the Jersey Shore and you go out in a boat, the water level gradually gets deeper out to about 200 miles, and then all of a sudden drops off. That's called the continental slope, the continental shelf, and then it reaches what they call the abyssal plain. That's the place where it drops down. Again, modern geologists don't have an explanation for that. We do. So, here's our two plates. Here's our fountains of the deep that are blasting out. And as that water is blasting out, it's eroding material from the edges. It's eroding material from the edges of the plates. And as that material is eroding, the edges of the plates on either side of the opening start to drop down a little bit because of that material being eroded away. And what you get, as this material erodes away, it erodes away here in the edges of the opening, and then the plates, as this material is eroded away, the plates start to sag down. This is our picture of what the fountains of the deep look like. Here's our continental shelf, this right here. This is the continental slope where it suddenly drops off, and then the deep area beyond it, out here, the abyssal plain. It perfectly explains the structures that we see. And again, if I bounce out of this real quick and go back to this one, actually, this one here. Here we can see the continent, and then this is this shallow area all right along here. That's that continental shelf. Same thing here. This is our continental shelf that is formed by the erosion and the motion of the flow coming out from the fountains of the deep. Again, it's one of those things where the flood explanation, our catastrophic plate tectonics explanation, explains a lot of these features that normal geology kind of goes, we're not exactly sure. One of the other interesting things that geologists can't explain is that literally the entire Earth, the entire surface of the Earth, is covered in what is called sedimentary rock. Okay, going back to earth science, three basic kinds of rocks: sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic. Igneous rock is volcanic rock, all right? It was molten material that then solidifies, okay? Basalts, the material that the ocean bottom is made of, that is igneous rock. That is rock that was molten lava that then hardens. Metamorphic rock is rock that was some other kind of rock and then is metamorphosized, it's changed into a different type of rock, usually by heat and pressure. Sedimentary rock is layers of sediments, bits and pieces of soil and sand and things like that, erosion materials that is formed underwater. Let's go back here. The entire Earth's surface, every continent is covered with sedimentary rock. And sedimentary rock was formed underwater. How can you have every continent be covered with rock that was formed underwater unless every continent at one time was underwater? Duh. There's so many of these things that, to quote that great yellow American, Homer Simpson, it's such a simple explanation. Secular uniformitarianism says this happened over millions and millions and millions of years. Catastrophic hydroplate catastrophism, our explanation, says it happened in a few tens of days, at most a year. At most a year. Let's look at how. Where's it coming from? Well, we've got the granite plates, and we've got the fountains of the deep bursting out here, all right? This jet of water under hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds per square inch of pressure at supersonic speeds, jetting out across this rock, and it's going to erode that rock. Where are the sediments coming from? Well, there's crud and stuff like that. There's been water in these chambers that have been dissolving minerals from the mantle and from the granite above it for a long time. And those minerals, those bits, are floating around in this water. From the gap, as this water starts to blast out here, all right, these edges start to erode. And bits and pieces of rock fall into this jet and get blasted out with it. This is not just a jet of water coming out. This is like a jet of mud, a jet of liquid concrete almost, coming blasting out of there. And then as this bottom edge here and the top edge here get eroded, they sort of crumble and fall into the flow and then get blasted out as well. So here's this water that is blasting out and then is falling from the sky all over the entire planet. Whoops, I did not do that. There we go. And it causes this sedimentary layering. It causes this layering of sediments across the entire planet. There are consistent layers, and they're horizontal layers. They're sideways, literally all over the planet. And this is one of those ones that you ask a geologist this, and they go, or they kind of walk away from you. If this is happening over millions of years, you're depositing a layer of sediments, there should be erosion happening over those millions of years in those layers of sediments. We don't see that. We see layer after layer after layer after layer of sediments being laid down with no erosion between the layers. That's not possible. That's not a reasonable explanation. The layers have very sharply defined boundaries. And we'll see some pictures later. If you've ever seen pictures of the Grand Canyon, and we're going to get to some at the end here. Actually, no. Let's do that. Let me just jump to this last couple of slides here. Grand Canyon. See the layers? Number one, they're horizontal. They go sideways, very sharply defined between the layers, and no erosion, but very sharply defined layers between each one. Again, this long term, over millions and millions and millions of years, does not explain how we can get this. I can. And other stuff. So we're here, yeah. Okay, those sharply defined boundaries. And secular geologists will say, well, if this is what's going on, and if there was a flood, there's going to be a layer in there that's going to have all this dead stuff. All right, one layer that's all this dead stuff. Because remember, they're saying millions and millions and millions of years. So layers, 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 flood, and then more layers. And there's no layer that shows the flood. Dummies. The layers are the flood. The layers are the flood. Those layers being laid down the way they are, horizontal layers, sedimentary layers across the entire planet, no erosion between them, and fossils in literally every layer. Their explanation is, oh, well, there's this layer and things died in that one, and then this one and this one. It's what they call the geologic column. That the oldest stuff is at the bottom and the youngest stuff is at the top, and that shows our evolution and all that kind of good garbage. They're missing the forest for the trees. Remember I said at the beginning, there's evidence all over the entire planet? That's it. We've got this sedimentary material that is all over the entire planet. On the tops of mountain ranges, there's sedimentary material. Now again, be careful there, because Everest was not there during the flood. Everest got formed in that year time span after the flood and shoved all that rock upwards. And the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains and the Alps and the Andes were all formed by processes that were happening after the flood itself. The water stopped after 150 days, but Noah was not let out of the ark for literally another 6 months, because there's all kind of stuff going on. We're going to wrap that up next week. There was all kind of stuff still going on the planet that was making it far too dangerous for Noah and his family and the animals to come out. The planet was still in chaos. But those fossils are literally everywhere. So how do layers form? It's a process of something called liquefaction. If you take a material, a sediment material, like sand, and saturate it with water, what it's going to do naturally is it's going to sort itself. All right, you ever get down to the beach and you're down close to the water level, close to the water line, and you dig a hole in the sand, and you get the hole, and then the water comes in, and if you dig the sand gets sort of loose and soft, that you can put your hand down into the sand. So because the sand is floating around in the water, it's saturated in the water. And then it begins to sort itself out. The big chunks go down toward the bottom and the little chunks work their way toward the top. The flood sediments were saturated. Remember, the entire planet is covered with water for 150 days. You know what your yard looks like when it rains for a week and the backyard has been sitting there soaked for a week, and how soft the soil gets. This is 150 days. And it's these sediments that are being deposited from the Geshem rains, from the flooding, gradually sorts itself out. It sorts it into layers. And then in that period of time when the waters begin to recede after the 150 days, the land begins to dry and the materials solidify in horizontal layers, sorted by materials with very distinct boundaries between each one, with no erosion between each one, because they all got laid down at the same time. You're not going to get any erosion. The neat thing is, it also explains, not only can you get this liquefaction and this layering of rock materials, but you also can get the exact same thing with organic materials that are buried in those sediments. Remember, all life on the planet, all life, every single thing died. every plant, every animal. It's all in there. And that same sorting process, that same liquefaction sorting process that sorted out the different layers of materials, the different kinds of rocks and the different minerals and things like that, also sorted out the organic material as well. And that explains why in layers there are similar fossil types in similar layers. All the clams sort of settled down to the same layer, and all the animal bones sort of settled in the same layer, and all the plants sort of settled in the same layer because they were similar shaped objects, similar shaped things that were settling out. It also explains the fossils themselves. We've all seen it. You're driving down the road and you see a deer that got hit by a car sitting along the side of the road. And if you go past that dead deer for a week or two or three, what happens? It gradually decomposes and scavengers eat it up and whatever. And eventually it goes away. And after a period of time, it disappears. So how do we get the fossils? If a T-Rex dies, falls over, it's laying there on the ground, how does its body stay intact to be able to be fossilized? Well, you got to bury it real quick, like in flood sediments. In sediments. Again, duh. What happened to all those dead things that were killed during the flood? They were buried in sediments rapidly, so that they were buried all together. They didn't decompose. They didn't get taken away by carnivores. Obviously, there weren't any with the flood, but with their explanation, you're looking at these things, you're not going to get all of these millions and millions and millions and millions of fossils getting buried like that just randomly. It had to have been some kind of rapid process. The layers and the fossils are the flood. The geologists say there's no evidence of a layer with the flood. Sure there is. It's all of them. It's the whole thing. That is the flood. It explains why similar layers have similar fossils. Again, that sorting process, that liquefaction process, similar kind of fossils settle down to similar layers. But every once in a while, you'll get fossils that are out of place. They're, as secular geologists would say, they're in the wrong layer. A relatively old type of creature is found in a young layer of rock, or vice versa. A relatively young creature is found in a old layer of rock. Well, that sorting process isn't perfect. Things get stuck, things get weighed down by like a big rock or something like that. So you can get creatures in different places in this column post-flood. Geologists can't explain that. This is the one I love. Well, coal seams. Coal and oil is fossilized stuff. What I find kind of funny, dinosaurs die, they get fossilized, they turn into oil. Man digs oil up, makes it into plastic to make plastic dinosaurs. Okay. But those coal seams, we've got these layers of coal full of fossils. My parents are from coal country of Pennsylvania, up near Harrisburg, Pottsville, that area. And I can remember as a kid, my grandfather taking me out to a couple of different cuts. There was a place where they were building Interstate 81, not too far from where they lived. And we would go up there, and he got us some little geology hammers, and we'd break them up and find these fossils in these layers of coal. Because that's what that is. The coal, the organic material that is coal, was a lot of this organic material, this vegetation material. And in those seams, those coal seams, it's a mix of kind of creatures. It's not just land creatures, it's not just sea creatures, it's a mixture, because all this stuff got killed all at the same time and got buried all at the same time. You're getting a mixture. You're not getting just land creatures there. You're getting a mixture of land creatures and sea creatures, all buried in the same layers. These huge dinosaur graveyards that are in the West, in the Midwest, out in Montana, out in Wyoming, out in Utah, they find areas, these massive areas of dinosaur graveyards, digging and finding hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dinosaur fossils. Oh, you want to go to one? Don't have to go that far. One of the earliest dinosaurs that was found is a dinosaur called the hadrosaur, all right, the duck-billed dinosaur, all right, stood on hind legs, relatively short arms, not like a T-Rex. It was a plant eater called the hadrosaur. The hadrosaur, its name comes from the town where it was found, Haddonfield. If you go into downtown Haddonfield, along Kings Highway in Haddonfield, in the middle of town, there's a giant bronze dinosaur statue. Because one of the first complete dinosaur skeletons that was ever found in the United States was found in a farmer's field outside of Haddonfield. And if you go to Williamstown, get on 322, go out to Glassboro, go through Rowan, I still call it Glassboro State. All right, go through Rowan University on 322 and keep going out 322, going south. There is, I believe it's called the Edelman Dinosaur Park. It's a dinosaur dig just outside of Glassboro, just south and west of Glassboro, where you can go, fantastic museum. You can go out and dig them up yourself if you want. It's really kind of cool. I want to take my scouts there sometime. But it's in that area, there's this huge layer of these dinosaur fossils. How are they all in the same place, all at the same time? This is the one that geologists, it just drives them absolutely crazy. This is what is called a polystrate fossil. This thing right here. It's a tree. It's a fossilized tree. Interestingly, it's not sitting this way, it's sitting this way, with these layers of rock, millions and millions and millions of years to lay these layers of rock, right? They're fossils that are found vertically through multiple layers. How could that happen? A tree dies, the bottom part of it gets buried in sediment, cool. What happens to the top part? It rots. It rots and it decomposes. How could this tree have stayed intact in the same place for millions of years as it's gradually getting buried by layer after layer after layer after layer of sediments? They don't have an explanation for that. We do. The trees got blasted out by the flood. They're floating around on the surface of the water like this. Most of them sunk to the bottom like that. Some of them got more waterlogged on one end than the other, so they sunk down this way, plunk, into the sediments vertically, and then the sediments piled up around that tree vertically, and it solidified and it fossilized. We've got an explanation for it. They don't. And here's our layers. Here's our layers in the Grand Canyon. Layer after layer after layer after layer after layer. Millions and millions and millions of years with no erosion between the layers. Sharp dividing lines between each kind of material. No. That's the flood. That's the evidence for the flood. It's all around us. It's all around us. What we're going to look at next week to wrap out. What about the mountains? What about the trenches? What about that stuff? How's that formed from the flood? Well, the same plate tectonics. The driving force is different. What about bent layers? There are layers where these rock layers, instead of being vertical like this, they're bent. They're bent and they're twisted. Their explanation is, oh, it's just gradual forces that make the rock bend. You ever see anybody bend a rock? I haven't. The Incredible Hulk can't bend a rock. He can break a rock. He can't bend it. How are we bending rocks? So we're going to wrap out with some of the other pieces of evidence that we see around the planet that helps to explain and helps to prove that, yes, indeed, the flood happened. We know it happened. We know it happened because it's here. We know that. But just like as we looked at way back in January and February, that the Bible is scientifically accurate. It's not a science textbook, but it's scientifically accurate. The flood is too. The events, the things that we see in the flood, the outgrowths of it, the aftermath of the flood is correct. It is accurate. We see it all over the planet. To those that don't believe, what does the Bible say about unbelievers that read this? It's foolishness. To them, it's foolishness. Yeah, to them, the flood story is foolishness. But to us that believe and look at it from that mindset, so let's close with a word of prayer. Again, next week we're going to wrap this out. And then you're going to be seeing, for the 2 weeks we're away, you're going to be seeing a video on the flood. It's got some great CGI stuff, some great scientists that sort of address it. We're really, the video is going to sort of, having somebody with a lot more letters after their name than I do, explaining some of this stuff and reinforcing some of the stuff that we've talked about. Lord, we thank you so much for the day you've given to us. Thank you for bringing us out today. Thank you for giving me the clarity of speech and the wisdom to be able to present this material for open hearts, for open minds, as we examine the truth that is in your scripture, Lord, and how we see that truth all around us, Lord. Again, we thank you so much for bringing us together today, that you would be with Pastor today as he brings forth the word, that he would bring it forth strong and clear, and that souls would be saved. All these things we ask in your Son's name. Amen.